All right. Hello, everyone. The audience is trickling in. Nice to see you all. I am so happy that you are here joining us tonight. This is Left Bank Books welcomes investigative journalist Carey Gillam, who will discuss her new book, The Monsanto Papers: Deadly Secrets, Corporate Corruption, and One Man's Search for Justice. Tonight, Carey will be in conversation with editor Emily Turner. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Carey and Island Press, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event. So please type your questions as a comment, and you can do that at any point in time throughout the conversation. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events lined up for the year and are adding events daily. March is packed with incredible events. About tonight's book, The Monsanto Papers. Lee Johnson was a man with simple dreams. All he wanted was a steady job and a nice home for his wife and children, something better than the hard life he knew growing up. He never imagined that he would become the face of a David and Goliath showdown against one of the world's most powerful corporate giants. But a workplace accident left Lee doused in a toxic chemical and facing a deadly cancer that turned his life upside down. In 2018, the world watched as Lee was thrust to the forefront of one of the most dramatic legal battles in recent history. The Monsanto Papers is the inside story of Lee Johnson's landmark lawsuit against Monsanto. For Lee, the case was a race against the clock, with doctors predicting he wouldn't survive long enough to take the witness stand. For the eclectic band of young, ambitious lawyers representing him, it was a matter of professional pride and personal risk, with millions of dollars and hard-earned reputations on the line. For the public at large, the lawsuit presented a question of corporate accountability. With enough money and influence, could a company endanger its customers, hide evidence, manipulate regulators, and get away with it all for decades? Readers will be astounded by the depth of corruption uncovered, captivated by the shocking twists, and moved by Lee's quiet determination to see justice served. With gripping narrative force that reads like fiction, the Monsanto Papers takes readers behind the scenes of a grueling legal battle, pulling back the curtain on the frailties of the American court system and the lengths to which lawyers go to fight corporate wrongdoings. Booklist says, Gillam narrates an of-the-moment reckoning with a major corporation whose products have been marketed as safe since the 1970s. As an examination of both corporate malfeasance and legal maneuvering in tort cases, Gillam's book personifies the need for consumer protections and safety. And Philip J. Landrigan, the director of the program for Global Public Health for the Common Good at Boston College, says, the Monsanto Papers blends science and human tragedy with courtroom drama in the style of John Grisham. It is a story of corporate malfeasance on a grand scale, a chilling revelation of the chemical industry's greed, arrogance, and reckless disregard for human life and the health of our planet. It is a must-read. About tonight's author. Investigative journalist Carey Gillam has spent more than 25 years reporting on corporate America, including 17 years working for Reuters International News Agency. Her 2017 book about pesticide dangers, Whitewash: The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer, and the Corruption of Science, won the 2018 Rachel Carson Book Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists and has become a part of the curriculum in several university environmental health programs. We proudly hosted Carey for that book here in St. Louis. Gillam is currently research director for the nonprofit consumer group U.S. Right to Know. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our guests for the evening, Carey Gillam and Emily Turner for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please help me in giving them a round of applause, welcoming them to the screen. Hello.
Hi. Virtual applause, right?
Yeah, but can you hear it?
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, applause for you, Shane. That was great.
Thank you. And we do have a great audience here already, and I'm certain that they will have questions for you, as this is such a relevant topic to the world today, to St. Louis in general. So
right.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. Me too.
Okay.
Well, I had the pleasure of working with Carey both on the Monsanto Papers and also on her first book, Whitewash. And so to get us started, I just wanted to ask Carey to talk just a tiny bit about Whitewash and how the research for that book led her to the Monsanto Papers.
Sure. Well, I tell this story, Emily. I'm going to tell it about you. I was working at Reuters. I spent 17 years there. I was covering the agrochemical industry, the big companies, Monsanto, Syngenta, Dow DuPont, and the pesticide industry. And Emily came to me and said, hey, would you write a book about a lot of the things you've been writing here about glyphosate and Monsanto? Glyphosate is the active ingredient in the Roundup weed killer. And there were a lot of scientific studies that were mounting, showing both environmental harm as well as human harm, particularly a cancer connection. And Emily thought it would make a great book. I thought she was wrong. I thought nobody would want to read a book about a pesticide. But she convinced me I was wrong. And yeah, we wrote Whitewash, and it won a couple, 2-3 awards, and really resonated around the world. And I ended up speaking to the European Parliament, testifying there about the findings revealed in Whitewash about glyphosate. So, I like to think or differentiate that as more of an academic sort of book. I mean, I think it reads well, but it is very specific to science and environmental health and sort of regulatory matters, whereas this book is really just a tale about a man suffering, trying to hold a company accountable.
Yeah. So let's turn to that book and that very famous case of Lee Johnson in 2018. Could you tell us all just why this was such an important case and what it meant both for Lee and for the public at large?
Yeah, so this book focuses on the first trial, the first plaintiff to take Monsanto to trial on the allegation that their Roundup products, these glyphosate-based weed killers, cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And this, allegation and this concern had been out there for many, many, many years. Monsanto had always said its products were incredibly safe. It had regulators backing it around the world, including the EPA here in the US. But the International Agency for Research on Cancer in 2015 said, no, actually the science indicates that this, is a probable human carcinogen, this chemical in this product. So Lee is one of, over 100,000 people in the US who have non-Hodgkin lymphoma or have already died from it, and sued Monsanto, blaming the company and its weed killers for causing non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But Lee, by circumstance and the sad fact that his cancer was deemed terminal and he was given a very short time to live, so he became the very first person to go to trial against Monsanto and the very first to win a jury verdict that stunned the company and really turned the narrative around and drew great international attention to this subject matter and really put a spotlight on the efforts that the company had been engaging in to hide the science for so many years.
Great. And Carey, did you want to read just a little bit about, from the book, about when Lee first met one of his lawyers?
Sure. So this was Lee meeting Tim Litzenberg for the first time. And Tim was the first person from the Miller firm, the lawyer from the Miller firm, to be assigned to Lee's case. And you have to understand that Lee's cancer, his non-Hodgkin lymphoma, was a type called mycosis fungoides that manifests in the skin and the tissue. And so the cancerous lesions were not, underneath in his bodily organs, but actually visible on his skin. So here we are. So this is their first meeting. So for that first meeting between lawyer and client, Lee and Tim met at an Applebee's chain restaurant not far from Lee's apartment. The two had already spent long hours on the telephone discussing Lee's declining health, and Tim knew from the photos in his medical file that Lee's skin was grotesquely deformed by the cancerous lesions that covered him from head to toe. But he still was taken aback when he saw Lee in person for the first time. Though Lee was wearing long sleeves and pants, it was impossible to hide the patches distorting his face, neck, and hands. He looked like a man who'd been burned in a fire, wounded in a war he had never signed up to fight. Lee was wary at first. What could this young white Southerner actually do for him? But the fact that Tim was willing to take time away from his own family and travel all the way from Virginia to California meant something to Lee. Clearly, there was no way Tim could save his life, but maybe there was a way, Lee thought, that Tim could make his suffering mean something. Maybe there was a way to hold someone responsible.
Thanks. And on that note, it's been a few years since that meeting took place and since the case. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about why the case continues to matter and if there have been developments since the case actually concluded.
Right. So Lee's trial was held in the summer of 2018. It started in June and the jury verdict came back on August the 10th. And since that time, Monsanto was sold to Bayer, the big German conglomerate. Bayer actually closed on the acquisition just as the trial was getting underway. So Bayer has really picked up the liability, which the company is not very happy about. The investors have been very unhappy about. And as I said earlier, over 100,000 people have similar claims against the company. There have been 2 more trials, 2 more losses for the company, 2 more huge jury verdicts. The final verdict in the last of the 3 trials that have been held to date had $2 billion awarded to the plaintiffs against the company. That was a husband and wife who both were diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma after extensive exposure to the company's products. So Bayer now has decided they don't want to go to trial anymore. They don't want to try this out in the public. They have agreed to pay $11 billion out to try to settle these 100,000 or so claims as best they can. And they additionally are trying very hard to put in place a mechanism that will prevent future victims, future cancer patients from coming forward to sue them. And they have a proposal in federal court right now looking to pay about another $2 billion to try to head off future litigation here in the US. But, it's very much an open question as to whether or not they're going to be able to do that.
And to go back to the landmark trial for just a moment, Lee was represented by a number of different lawyers. They're kind of a eclectic bunch. There's some pretty fun stories in the book about not just their professional work, but their personalities. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about some of the lawyers that you got to know and what made them so unique and important to the success of this trial.
Yeah, they were all quite different and a little eccentric in certain ways, some of them. I think what I learned is that to be a very successful, big-time mass tort attorney, winning these big cases against these big clients, you have to have a big personality, in addition to being very strategic and very intelligent and knowing the law very well and just, having a lot of resources at your disposal. You've got to have some guts too. You got to be willing to get out there and take risks. And as I think Shane said in the introduction, these mass tort attorneys, and specifically the people I write about in the book, they put their own personal finances, millions and millions of dollars out on these cases years, for travel, for experts, for depositions, for discovery documents, all of the pleadings that they have to file in court and the court appearances that they have to make. And, if they lose these big cases, which, they quite often do, they get no money at all. They don't get paid. They don't get their expenses reimbursed. It's only when they win that they then, take a cut of whatever is awarded to the plaintiffs. So, to take that kind of risk and go out on a limb, you really gotta have something in your personality, and you see it in, Mike Miller, kiteboarder, Michael Baum is always out there wanting to body surf, and Amy Wagstaff is, oh, I can't even talk about it. Well, you'll have to read about Amy in the book, but they all have their own interesting stories behind the work that they were doing in the litigation.
Yeah. And I know one key moment in the trial was when Lee's lawyers decided that it was really important for some of the information that was being presented in court to be available to the public. And the judge ended up not being too happy about that, but Lee's lawyers actually leaked some of the court documents to a journalist, and you happened to be that journalist. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about why those documents were so important, why you felt the public needed to see them, and if you had any reservations about leaking the documents, given that the judge ended up not being so happy about it.
Right. So to answer the last question first, no, absolutely no reservations whatsoever. I mean, when you get internal corporate documents that reveal, deeply held secrets that pertain directly to public health, no, those documents needed to be out there and needed to be available for everyone to see. Monsanto was working very hard to try to keep their internal documents sealed. They had to turn them over to the plaintiff's attorneys because of court order, because of discovery. This was all in preparation for trial. And at this point, it wasn't even known that Lee would be the first plaintiff yet. So this was being done on a general basis. But one of the lawyers, in particular, Brent Wisner, felt very strongly about the fact that what the lawyers were seeing in the internal documents that they were receiving was so egregious and was so pertinent to public health, and people were being exposed every day around the world, and needed to have information about the deception that Monsanto had engaged in to manipulate the scientific record, to influence regulators, to try to harass and silence independent scientists who tried to warn about their products. So he, as we go through the book, as you read in the book, he crafted a plan, and it was very strategic, and he had to essentially lay a trap for Monsanto's lawyers, and he had to just hope and pray that they would walk right into the trap, and they did. And so he was able then legally to release the documents at 12:01 a.m. He wanted to do it very quickly. And he wanted to get them out in a way that they could not be taken back. And so Brent and I had been discussing it, and I was awake at 12:01 a.m. and got the documents and downloaded them and got them up on a public website where the world could see them. And Brent sent them out as far and wide as he possibly could. And the next morning, Monsanto was pretty hot and went to the judge and wanted the documents, wanted to see if they could close the barn door, I guess, after the horse had gotten out, and it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, speaking of Monsanto's tactics, after all your reporting, and particularly after the publication of Whitewash, maybe it's fair to say that some of the folks at Monsanto are not your biggest fans. I wondered if you might just talk about some of the tactics that have been used against you as a journalist so that you would not report these key stories.
Right. And it began before Whitewash. It began many years ago when I was still at Reuters. It began in mid-2000s when I was covering Monsanto pretty aggressively, and the science was really starting to gel, showing a lot of problems. At that point, it was mostly environmental problems, although there was still a great deal of science that was raising red flags about human health. But the company, I spent time at Monsanto. I spent time in their headquarters and with their executives, and had what I thought was a, friendly, professional relationship. We had to talk about products and their business for my stories for Reuters on a regular basis. But as I started writing more about what was being revealed in scientific research, they became very upset and very angry and directly told me that I shouldn't be writing from a perspective that came from anyone but them, essentially. That the only valid information came from them. There was no valid science from outside parties that should be written about. And they started working to silence me, to get me removed from my beat at Reuters. When I left Reuters and wrote the book, they put together a spreadsheet and an attack plan. They funded front groups to write negative articles about me. They engineered some SEO, Google posting things, to try to, when people Google my name, it would lead you to something horrible written about me. And we know those things happen because we got those internal documents. They were part of discovery documents that they had to turn over in the litigation, talking about me. So yeah, and I guess the overwhelming thought that I had was, my gosh, if they do this to me, just me, this one gal hanging out in Kansas writing a couple books, what are they doing, to scientists? What are they doing to these really important people around the world who've been trying to alert people to the harms of their products?
Well, after having covered this trial so closely, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about whether you see the court system differently. Clearly, in this case, Monsanto was, at least to some degree, held accountable for their actions. But are legal cases really the best way to prevent this kind of corruption? What are your takeaways in terms of?
So one thing that I maybe naively wasn't really aware of, or it hadn't really registered until I've, really got into covering these cases, because I've covered court cases before, but I guess I've never watched how the sausage is made, so to speak. I've never paid as much attention outside of the actual trial. And so it was surprising to me to see how much evidence doesn't get allowed, to be presented to a jury. I think people might assume that each side just gets all their evidence and you just put it all out there and let the jury sort it out. But that really isn't the way that it works. I mean, the judge really has a very important position to decide what information the jury's going to get and what they're not going to get. And, factual evidence that the plaintiff's side might think is incredibly important to their case, and all very true and factual, the judge can say, yeah, you know what? No, we don't think so. It's going to be too prejudicial or not as relevant as you think it is. And the same is true for the defense side. So the amount of evidence that the jury was not allowed to see in the Johnson trial was very surprising to me, and shocking. And so I thought that was interesting. Other things about the way that the court cases are put together and the hoops that everybody has to jump through, that I think are really interesting. But overall, to answer your question, the plaintiff's bar in this mass tort system, what I sort of came to conclude is, it's a very imperfect system. There's a lot of good, but there's also a lot of bad and a lot of ugly and kind of some sleazy in there. But lawyers like the ones who have led this Roundup litigation really are the only defense that consumers have. If you don't have these people out there spending their money, putting their time and their reputations and their hard-earned finances on the line for consumers, there's no one else out there to hold companies to account when they put forward defective or dangerous or misbranded products. Our regulators are supposed to do it. They're not. That is well established across a range of industries. And our lawmakers really aren't doing anything about it either. So you have a corporate capture in Washington, D.C., and in, the same is true in many other countries around the world, where the regulatory agencies are really, influenced very heavily by the companies whose products those regulators are supposed to be restricting or regulating or overseeing. And public health too often just, gets put on the back burner, and these corporate profit interests, are made the priority. And so, I do think there's a debate that's gone on for many years about the mass tort plaintiffs bar, et cetera, et cetera. People call them ambulance chasers, and they're out there just to exploit people and get their hopes up that they're going to win many millions of dollars, and they get drug around the court system, and then the lawyers get rich if they win, and the people get very little. And a lot of that is true. But it's also true, as I said, there's nothing else out there. It takes lawyers like the ones in this book to really do the hard work to hold these companies accountable. Shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is until we demand something different.
You mentioned some things that surprised you about the court system. Was there anything else in the course of your research that surprised you about what Monsanto was up to? I know you've been covering them for many years, so maybe nothing surprises you at this point, but anything that stood out to you?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I don't know. No. I don't. There were a lot of things that I just, I thought it was hugely hilarious. I guess that they made took great pains to tell the judge and the court that there shouldn't be any references to the tobacco industry. There's no comparison between Monsanto's strategies and tactics, to finance front groups and to manipulate the scientific record, influence regulators. No similarities. We shouldn't be compared to the tobacco industry, or colored with that, phrase or image at all. And who was the lead defense attorney for Monsanto at the very first trial? It was a man who spent most of his career defending the tobacco industry. So I thought that was interesting. No, their lawyers, did a great job. There were interesting things that we don't really know of what happened. There were things that were around the trial date. Things started popping up on people's phones around San Francisco, right around the courthouse. Google sponsored ads about how safe Roundup was, and that sort of thing. And people speculated that Monsanto was paying to have these things pop up, so jurors, if they were looking on their phones or whomever, would see this material. But I don't know. There was a lot that went on. It was an interesting time.
Yeah, for sure. So I wonder if you could tell readers what you hope they will take away after having read the book.
What I hope they'll take away. The bigger picture here for me, and the book is dedicated to people with cancer. I'll just read this quick little dedication here. This book is dedicated to the countless men and women stricken with cancer I have come to know in the course of researching and writing this book. People who have trusted me with their stories of suffering, fear, rage, and yes, hope. Always hope. And, that's, I guess, what I want people to think about. This is a story about one man, Lee Johnson, who saw his dreams and his plans, to watch his two boys grow up. He saw that, changed. He was given a death sentence, irreparably tearing his life apart through cancer. And the facts are that, 600,000 people in the U.S. every year, are diagnosed with cancer. And that's just in the U.S. 40%, 39.8% of Americans are expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes. We know that environmental toxins, contaminants, chemicals like pesticides, like glyphosate, contribute to disease, contribute to cancer, as well as a range of other health problems. We know that. The science is out there. And yet, what are we doing about it? So this is one company and one chemical and one man with cancer, but I'm hoping people see it as a larger sort of cautionary tale, if you would, about, what is happening out there to us all. We're getting sick. Our children are going to be sick. we need to do something about it. We need to hold the companies to account. We need to make their products safer, and be truthful about disclosing the risks of using the products. And we need to care. We need to just not accept and live with cancer. We need to care about trying to reduce things that cause cancer.
Well, there's a lovely dedication to the book. And since this all began with one of those people stricken with cancer, Lee Johnson, I wondered if you could just tell us a little about what has happened to Lee since the end of the case, how he's doing. I know you saw him not too long ago. People would like to hear how he's doing.
Yeah, so remarkably, Lee is still alive. He was not supposed to be. His doctors had given him, 18 months to live. They were not sure this was, way back, early on. He wasn't even expected to live perhaps through his trial in 2018. Monsanto's attorneys, or their doctors, the attorneys represented, expected Lee to live until November of 2019. They put a very firm date on that. And here we are in March of 2021, and he's still out there. I think, Emily, I had told you, or maybe not, as we talked about the book, I thought that my last chapter would be his funeral. At the beginning, when I was writing it and spending so much time with Lee, because he just he's been so sick and suffering so much, in so much pain. But, he also decided at one point, sort of midway through this, and told me, he just decided he wasn't going to die. He doesn't want to leave his boys. He doesn't want to leave his family. And he just decided that if there was a way that strength and mind over matter and soul and, everything else that he could throw at it. And so who knows, but yeah, he's still out there. He's living and spending time with his boys, and still dealing with pain on a daily basis. But he's doing as well as can be expected.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I also wanted to ask you about the health of Monsanto, which has now been absorbed by Bayer. Do you think this case has had long-term implications for them? And do you think there's any hope for some of these pesticides being regulated more effectively?
Right. Well, it's had an incredibly detrimental effect on Bayer. When the first verdict came out in August 2018, the share price plummeted immediately. And they have struggled with their market capitalization and their share price ever since, largely because of the liability associated with this Roundup litigation. In fact, they've been sued by investors for doing the deal. It's been called the worst corporate acquisition in all of corporate history. The investors called for the head of Bayer to be removed. He was not, but he is leaving the company now. He said that he will go ahead and leave the company. So, it's been quite devastating for Bayer to have acquired Monsanto when it did. In terms of regulation, we don't really know. The EPA, up until the Biden administration taking over, under the Trump administration, the EPA was solidly backing Bayer and Monsanto. We have a memo I write about in which, it's from the White House, and a consulting company was talking with them about glyphosate and Monsanto, and they said, we have Monsanto's back on glyphosate. Don't worry about any regulation. We got your back. It's actually in writing. So, but the Biden administration has come in. Joe Biden issued an executive order in January saying that he wanted to review. He wanted his EPA and his regulatory agencies to review these decisions that have been made under the Trump administration. He said to put in abeyance defending those decisions, defending glyphosate and other chemicals. So we'll see. I guess I'm a little cynical, a little skeptical that we might see big change in Washington, but maybe we will.
Hope so. Maybe before we turn to the audience's questions, I'll just ask if anyone has any skepticism about what Monsanto has been up to and about some of the health concerns. What do you think is the most damning piece of evidence against them and the biggest reason why people should be concerned about the use of glyphosate?
Gosh, if you have to, I don't think there's one. I don't know. I don't think there's one piece that you can pluck out. I think it's the story. I mean, the manipulation of the scientific literature is really sort of an egregious thing that has been pointed to a lot, and so I guess we would point to that. But it wasn't just one. You know, it wasn't just one paper. They had engaged in this over and over again, and they didn't only do it for glyphosate. There are emails where they talk about ghostwriting a paper for the safety of a GMO crop, and they're hunting around trying to find an academic who'll put his name on it, but it's hard to find somebody that'll slap their name on something that they didn't write. That was a big part of their strategy, was to find outside people, outside scientists whose name they could put on papers that Monsanto scientists wrote that talked about how great their products were, but you would put a third-party scientist on it to edit and sign their names, so to speak, which is what one Monsanto scientist wrote in an email to his colleagues. And they ghostwrote papers. And I guess what resonated with the jury and with me and maybe with others is, if your product really is safe, you shouldn't have to ghostwrite the science. You shouldn't have to get in and tinker and manipulate. You shouldn't have to pay the editor of one of the journals that publishes scientific papers $400 an hour as a consulting fee. You shouldn't have to, secretly. There's one paper that they talk about ghostwriting. Those were their words. That the internal documents, they talk about how important this paper is going to be for the defense of glyphosate around the world, and the 3 years of work that 17 Monsanto scientists put into this paper that basically declared that there was no safety concern with glyphosate whatsoever, cancer, reproductive health, nothing. Like, this thing, you could bathe in it pretty much. And this paper was given to regulators around the world. Didn't have a Monsanto scientist's name on it at all. It had 3 purportedly independent scientists' name on it. But Monsanto internally cheered it, patted themselves on the back, and they even had T-shirts or polo shirts printed to give to their own scientist, as bravo for work well done in ghostwriting this paper. So you see all of that in these internal memos.
It's pretty dramatic. Well, Carey, thank you so much for answering my questions. I'm curious about others. I'm sure there are many people who would like to ask you some things.
Yeah, we do have a lot of audience questions, including several of my own, because wow, that is, like, the story is so fascinating, and it always just, every time I find out new information about this, it just blows my mind. And I was reminded, like, throughout the entire conversation, I was like, this reminds me so much of, like, the Aaron Brockovich thing. And then I was like, oh wait, she blurbed your first book.
You did.
So yeah, like, just that whole, like, just completely baffling court case of, like, how is this a thing? Like, how did they do this? But the first question is going to come from Daniel, who is also Blackberry Puppets of note. I mentioned that in the thing. So Daniel asks, do you think the jurors were swayed more by sympathy for Lee Johnson or by the fact that they were presented an even-handed view of the science by both the plaintiffs and Monsanto? So I'm wondering if you have some insight onto how you think.
Hearing the last part of your question, you said swayed more by sympathy for Lee or
if they were presented, or by the fact that they were presented an even-handed view of the science by both plaintiffs.
So what they said, I interviewed several of them, and they talked about this afterwards, and many of them wrote letters to the judge actually after the verdict, when she was contemplating Monsanto's request that she reverse the verdict. She did not, but they said no one really mentioned sympathy for Lee I mean, I think you would, because he's in a terrible situation. But if there's no proof that the company's product caused it, you would still have sympathy for him, but you wouldn't find in favor of him. But what they all said was that the science showing association, epidemiology, toxicology, the animal studies, the human studies, the laboratory studies, coupled with the lies and the deceit that Monsanto had engaged in, that when you put it together, it was a unanimous decision, and none of them really even expressed much of a doubt about it.
Karen's question is, do you think the move to centralize ag retail in large corporations like Nutrien versus smaller co-ops and privately held ag retail locations is better or worse for individual farmers and laborers and rural communities?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with farmers, especially during my time with Reuters, and I mean, that was to be out in the fields a lot. And I guess what you heard mostly was, consolidation. They did not think consolidation was a good thing, right? I mean, the more of your inputs and your seeds and everything that you put into the hands of a few very powerful corporations, they worried about pricing, they worried about variety, they worried about access to things that, particular germplasm or strains or varieties that they might want. And so I guess I'd say no, but I mean, I'm not an expert in that. But
maybe that could be your next book.
The ones that I would talk to would say that they would not want to see, they have not been happy about the consolidation that we've seen in the industry.
Yeah. Anna Mary asks, do you see that these legal losses have in any way changed the corporate culture of Monsanto and Bayer to make them acknowledge their role in causing cancer and damaging the environment?
So Monsanto, in essence, is no more, right? I mean, Bayer got rid of the name. They don't want anything to do with the name, although in the litigation, they still make sure that they use the name. But they have told me and others, directly. I mean, I had a sit down face-to-face with one of their executives not too long ago, that they are different, and they want to be different, and they want to be more transparent, and they don't want to engage in the tactics that Monsanto did. Is that sincere? Is it not? It's hard to know. They've been hard hit by all of this. They really don't want to put a warning label. The easiest thing for them to do is put a warning label on their products that says, they don't even have to agree with it. They can just say, the International Agency for Research on Cancer says that, glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in this product, is a probable human carcinogen. Boom, end of story. It's a true fact. That's what it says. And then it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for consumers to sue them, for users to sue them, because they've been warned. I mean, that was a key part of this litigation, is a failure to warn. The company actively refused to put warning labels on its products of the associations to cancer. Even way back when, in the 1980s, the EPA scientists were saying, hey, this looks like it causes cancer, and Monsanto was fighting back against them. They still don't want to put a label on there, but they are starting to edge closer to that now and talk about some sort of language on a label.
I'm personally curious, why do you think that is?
That they're reluctant, or that they're edging closer?
No, that they're reluctant. Like, I mean, it just doesn't, as a consumer, it doesn't make sense to me, like, why they wouldn't acknowledge, especially after all the lawsuits and things, like why they wouldn't just go ahead and do that.
I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar a year, product line that has been bringing in multi-billions of dollars for over 40 years. So, and the chief reason that it has been such a top seller has always been because of its safety profile, because it's highly effective, and because according to the company, it's very, very safe. And, advertisements for it showed people out in flip-flops and shorts, t-shirts, spraying away. Internally, Monsanto and documents show that they told their own people, hey, if you're spraying this, be sure you're wearing long sleeves and long pants and gloves, and you're not letting it get on your skin and that sort of thing. But their advertisement and their communications to consumers was always quite different. So, it'd be a pretty radical messaging and branding change to now join a lot of the other pesticides that are sold out there that do have a lot of language warning. People, be very careful, be sure you wear protective gear, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see.
Yeah. Let's go to a question from Digger. And also, audience, if you're watching and have as many questions as I do, please do type those up in the comments. Digger is asking, so Monsanto tried to escape bad press and liability for PCBs, another carcinogenic product they produced, by spinning off Solutia.
Solutia.
Okay.
God, that's, how long ago was that? 2003 or something, right? I have to look that back up.
So the question is, could Bayer make the same attempt by spinning off Monsanto or use another gambit?
There's been a lot of talk of that now. I mean, one thing that Bayer has actively threatened is that it would file for bankruptcy, that it would do something like that to head off the ability of plaintiffs to seek large awards or remuneration. So they have threatened to file for bankruptcy. They have threatened to take other moves. Whether that would be a spinoff, I don't know. It's sort of hard to do that. I mean, Monsanto wasn't super successful in doing that with Solutia. But I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. I think they're pinning their hopes right now, because they were able to get this settlement with the majority of the big law firms that have the majority of the plaintiffs. Now the missing piece is if they can figure out how to head off future lawsuits in the U.S. They do also have mass tort class action lawsuit, same allegations, farmers, Roundup, non-Hodgkin lymphoma in Australia. There's a trial date set for that first plaintiff in that class action, but they're also working to try to mediate that and see if they can settle out of court in that case as well. So.
Karen has another question. What, if any, changes has Monsanto Bayer issued to its customers about how to handle Roundup glyphosate after these cases?
I haven't really heard of any. I think, what you see more than anything is just a continued strong defense, and that they respectfully disagree. They have great sympathy for the people with cancer, but they respectfully disagree with the juries in these 3 trials, and they disagree with all the scientists who say that there's evidence of cancer. Their bottom line still is, no, everybody is wrong and this doesn't cause cancer. And look at the EPA and look at these other regulatory agencies, and they all say they're on our side. And so, it doesn't cause cancer and you guys are wrong, is their position.
That leads to a question that I thought of. So during the previous administration, there were a number of cabinet members that clearly had kind of corporate interests in mind and a lot of anti-environment issues that they were kind of pushing to make happen. So my question is, how much do you think that impacted the court case, and do you think that that high level of cabinet position and the obvious corporate interests that they had will continue to affect things down the road?
I think it's too early to tell, right? We have a whole new administration. We have a whole new group of people running the show, so to speak. You do have some of the characters recycled, right, from the Obama administration and from others. I don't know. I mean, the agrochemical industry is dug down deep into the culture of Washington, D.C., and the way laws are made and the way regulations, are handled. And there was just a survey that came out about scientists. It was polling scientists from within different agencies and scientists within the EPA, and it was asking questions like, do you feel like you can speak up, if you see violations of the law or you see wrongdoing, can you tell the truth about the science and things like that? And unfortunately, the survey showed that a vast majority of the scientists said, no, we don't feel confident that we can be truthful about what we're seeing going on in the agency. So, we still have a lot of work. There's a lot of work to do, I think, to undo that culture.
I think we may have answered this question already, but I will ask it just to see if there's, but even with a warning label, do you think there would be significant impact on the amount of Roundup Ready beans and crops that would be planted?
Probably not, right? I don't know. At least not. No, I don't think so. I could be completely off base about this, but I think the farmers are really sophisticated users of agrochemicals, right? I mean, they're the ones. You don't see a lot of farmer plaintiffs in this litigation. Farmers understand we're using these chemicals. These chemicals can kill us. They're toxic. They're designed to kill weeds and bugs and that sort of thing. And they usually are pretty careful. And they have a lot of, there's applicator training out there for people using certain pesticides. And so, and they're in the cab of a truck, an air-conditioned sort of, tractor or something. So their exposures are different, and their mindset is very focused on, what's the most economical way and what is my practice and what are my inputs and that sort of thing. So I think they know, their line of work comes with certain risks, just as every line of work does. And exposure to potentially toxic, dangerous chemicals is one of them, and they mitigate it the best they can. So I don't think that a warning label would change it for farmers, but I could be completely wrong.
I will ask. I want to involve Emily again. So, Emily, I want to know, where you really, with your editorial vision, what were you thinking would be your, achievement for this book? Where do you want the audience to really go, aha, and, we can change the world. We can make this not happen again?
The first thing that comes to mind is actually an anecdote about whitewash, and Carey can fill in all the details if I get a little fuzzy about it. But I know some university campuses actually decided to stop using Roundup as a result of the book, and students learned about it. The university administration felt this was important, and so we would love New York Times book reviews and all that great media, but ultimately I think this is about people understanding the dangers of these chemicals and changing their behavior as a result. And so when you hear that kind of story of people reading the book, learning about the dangers, and actually making a concrete change, that's what's most heartening to me.
And I didn't know that. You never said that to me. All you said to me was that you cried when you read the epilogue.
I did. It's a very moving book, and I think that's what's so wonderful about the Monsanto Papers is there's a lot of terrible corporate corruption, and you will be outraged when you read this book, but you will also be really touched because there are people, Lee first and foremost, who was so affected by this, but also the lawyers who really put their reputations on the line to fight for something that they thought was important. So it is an emotional book in addition to being an important issue.
Yeah, and you meet other plaintiffs and, Lee's children and his wife and his friend Daryl. And yeah, I think that's why I'm so happy about this book, is I feel like it's a really just a human interest story that is powerful, but also is a real testament to the strength of, I guess, human resilience, right? When you're driven and you want to overcome. And I think Lee embodies that.
All right, one more question from Digger before we go. Digger asks, isn't Roundup becoming increasingly ineffective in agricultural applications as weeds develop resistance to Roundup and glyphosate?
Well, yes, and that's like a question that the answer could take like forever.
You only have 1 minute. No.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Like, so I don't think that Roundup or glyphosate is going to go away because people are going to say, I mean, it is, I guess there are several countries trying to ban it, but it's become so much less effective. So farmers have been increasingly looking for other tools to use other than glyphosate, because what happened was, because of the use of the implementation of genetically engineered crops that Monsanto rolled out to be sprayed with glyphosate directly, glyphosate tolerant crops, the use of glyphosate skyrocketed. And weed scientists said in the early 2000s, this is a bad idea because weeds are going to become resistant. You're going to be using so much of this chemical over and over and over and over again that you're going to mess with Mother Nature, and Mother Nature is not going to like it. And so, and that's exactly what's played out. So glyphosate is losing its effectiveness. Farmers are having to use more and more of it. They're having to couple it with more and more other types of herbicides. And so you're getting increasing, doses of these different kinds of toxic weed killers on the soil and the plants, and it's affecting birds and bees and butterflies and the health of the soil and the water and air. And I mean, yes, it's bad.
We do have a comment to share, so that I will sneak this in before we go. But Margot says DuPont or Dow did something similar, and a movie was made from the book about the damage to the community. Hopefully a movie will be made about yours as well.
There are talks underway, I'll say that. Yes, and that was a great movie and a great book. I don't know if you read the book. Rob Ballot, Exposed, was it Exposure, I think is the name of the book, but Dark Waters is the name of the movie. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely. It's terrifying, awful story.
Well, I want to thank you both. I am dropping the link again in the comments. We do have copies available for sale at left-bank.com. The specific link that I've shared in the comments will take you directly to the book. I want to thank both you, Carey and Emily. Thank you so much for this fantastic book. You both played such a large part in it. Carey, obviously, you wrote it, but Emily, like, the editor's role is often thankless, and I want to thank you. And I want to thank the audience for coming out tonight, for watching this incredible event. You've been great with your questions. And just really want to thank you for providing us with this information.
That was fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, and we will see you next time, audience. So we have a lot of really fantastic events coming up. I will be in conversation with Veronique Tajo tomorrow, who has a novel about the Ebola virus. So if you are interested in nature, environment, and kind of the effects that comes, it's a really beautiful book, and I think you might be interested. So hope to see everyone again very soon, and have a great rest of your evening.